Aloha and welcome to week 16. It is hard to believe that this is our last week of lectures now. So this one's about coral reefs, and this is another one where we could spend an entire semester on coral reefs, the ecosystems, the formation. It's amazing stuff. I know you all are going to love it. And I'm going to try to keep it a little bit surface level so that you don't have to listen to me lecture for hours and hours. But the main things, coral reefs are really, really important to the ecosystem. They're known as the rainforest of the sea, and they're found in a lot of places around the world, including here in Hawaii. And we'll talk about why they're found where they are and what forms them as we go through the first lecture today. So first, what is a coral reef? Corals are animals, as we learned back in week 12. Corals are in the phylum Cnidaria, related to jellyfish and anemones. Each coral is made up of teeny tiny animals called a polyp. And each polyp has a mouth and tentacles. They can capture plankton, but they rely heavily on algae called zooxanthellae that we'll look at here in just a minute. The polyps of hard corals secrete calcium carbonate. That's what actually forms those giant reef structures over time, and generations of coral build upon each other to create the big reefs. And so a coral polyp is this tiny animal, we just said that, with a mouth and tentacles. You can see that in the picture here. And they even have nematocysts. Some of you, if you've ever touched a coral, may have been stung by it. It can often sting. And then I just put a note on soft corals in here. We have soft corals in Hawaii too, and they do not form the calcium carbonate reef structures, but they do contain zooxanthellae, and they often are growing upon the calcium carbonate giant reef structures. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows the difference there. So coral anatomy and symbiosis. Inside the coral tissues live these photosynthetic algae known as zooxanthellae. This is a mutualistic relationship where both animals benefit, or both organisms benefit. The phytoplankton isn't an animal, but the algae gets food via photosynthesis. The coral gives the algae protection and extra carbon dioxide. So both of these animals are benefiting, making it a mutualistic relationship. And for the corals, the zooxanthellae provides the majority of its energy. That's why, because of these photosynthetic organisms that live within coral, that's why corals need sunlight. And it's why they need fairly clear water. If the water's too murky, corals don't grow well. So a few other specific conditions that reefs need. They need warm water. Most of you probably live in Fahrenheit, so that's around 74 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. They need sunlight, so fairly shallow water, and there are some minor exceptions to that, but for the most part, reefs are pretty shallow. They need clear, low nutrient water. That might feel counterintuitive. You might think more nutrients would give them more energy. But if there are too many nutrients in the water, it can block the sunlight, it can cause algal blooms, and so that's actually not great for a reef. They need clear water so that too much algae doesn't grow. The wrong kinds of algae don't grow on top of the corals, and that can smother the corals. And they need fairly stable salinity. Corals don't tolerate fluctuations in salinity well, so they don't generally like brackish water. They're very sensitive to change in general. There are 3 types of coral reefs. We have fringing reefs, that's the most common here in Hawaii, and those are the ones that are directly attached to the shoreline. We have barrier reefs that are separated by, you can see here, like a lagoon or a body of water between the reef and the land. And then we have atolls that essentially don't have land. And this is interesting because this is a time thing. Most reefs start off as fringing reefs, become barrier reefs over millions of years, and then eventually form into atolls. So a volcanic island forms, coral grows around it, and then over time the island subsides, and then the reef continues growing upward into an atoll. And oops, we can see that happening around the Hawaiian Islands. Obviously, Hawaii is the newest of the islands, and we have fringing reefs really only. But if you go all the way out to the far, far islands, we'll look at a map of them a little bit later, but you'll see things that are more atoll and barrier reef way out there. Examples. I think I have examples on the next slide. Oh, I don't. I have some examples later. Okay, why do coral reefs matter? They support, obviously, marine species, about 25% of all marine species. We've talked about this before, back when we talked about environmental changes. Coral reefs can protect coastlines from waves and from flooding events. Support fisheries and food systems. Obviously, there are tons of fish on coral reefs, and they can support the food systems that we need. And they drive tourism. People love to snorkel and scuba dive on coral reefs. Why wouldn't they, right? They're gorgeous. They're amazing. And so being able to see these things is important to a lot of people. They can also, I didn't put it in the list here, but they also provide medicines. We talked about that. Gosh, I feel like that was way back in week 1 or something, how there are a lot of chemicals and organisms in the ocean that we don't fully understand yet. And many of them have potential to be used in pharmaceuticals for medicines. So very, very important. Coral reefs thrive in low nutrient waters. We already said that. They are so productive because they are efficient at recycling nutrients. So it's essentially this relationship between all the different animals, and that's why this food web is so complex. You can see it's many tiers here. There's high heat energy lost between each level, but these are all very important parts to that complex food web. So they're efficient, even though there's still a lot of energy loss between each trophic level. Essentially, reefs are like hotspots of productivity in otherwise low productivity regions. This is just an example of a food web. Obviously, there are many different examples for food webs too on reefs. Just a quick introduction to reefs in Hawaii. Our third lecture is going to be all about the reefs in Hawaii, but we have mostly fringing reefs because we're a newer island. And obviously, the reefs are very important ecologically and culturally here. We'll talk about that more in lecture 3 too. And they support fisheries, coastal protection, tourism, all those things. Now, this is an interesting point that I wanted to include. This picture is of a mesophytic coral ecosystem, and it's found at 230 feet deep off Maui. So that seems too deep, right? This is at the very edge of where the sunlight can reach. So it's a slightly different type of reef, and it's one that is really pretty rare. And Hawaii is one of the very few places where these are found. So I thought that was an interesting thing to include here. So from our first lecture, key takeaways here: coral reefs are animal-built ecosystems. So corals are animals. They depend on symbiosis and the environment, specifically mutualism. They're very, very productive. They're highly sensitive, so they're very fragile. The same system that makes reefs successful can also make them vulnerable. So they're successful because they're in this very tight niche, but that also makes them vulnerable. So second lecture, we will look at what happens when the reef system breaks down, when coral bleaching happens, reef decline happens, that kind of stuff. So I'll see you in that one in just a minute.